Jake slowly opened his eyes. His head felt heavy, and the air around him was thick. Blinked a few times, trying to adjust to the dim light. The room was unfamiliar. The walls were made of some kind of metal, and the bed beneath him felt strange. The scent in the air was odd, not quite like anything he'd ever smelled before. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his chest. His body felt weak, as though he had been asleep for days. "Where am I?" Jake whispered to himself, his voice sounding hoarse. His mind raced, but it was all a blur. He couldn't remember how he had gotten here, or what had happened before he fell unconscious. Panic began to creep in. Was he in some kind of prison? A hospital? Or was this some sort of nightmare? As he pushed himself up from the bed, his eyes locked onto a figure sitting at the edge. It was a young girl, no older than 18, with dark, messy hair and a cold, determined look in her eyes. She was staring directly at him, unmoving. Jake froze. A sinking feeling filled his stomach as he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl had a knife in her hand. It was small, but sharp, and she was gripping it tightly, as if she was prepared to use it. His heart raced as the girl slowly stood up from the bed, the knife still in her hand. Her movements were quiet, calculated. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him as if she had all the time in the world. Jake scrambled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the bed. He had no idea what was happening or why this girl was in the room with him. But the fear in her eyes told him one thing. She was here for a reason, and it didn't seem like she wanted to be his friend. "What do you want?" Jake stammered, trying to gather his thoughts. His voice shook, but he couldn't help it. He was terrified. The last thing he remembered was being at home, and now he was here, in a strange place. Facing a girl who looked like she was ready to kill him? The girl didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her grip on the knife tightening. Jake's mind raced. He had to think fast. She was getting closer, and he was still trapped in the bed. He tried to push himself up, but his arms were too weak. The pain in his chest only made it harder to move. Without warning, the girl lunged. Jake's body reacted faster than his mind. He rolled off the bed, narrowly avoiding the blade as it swiped past him. His heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet. He wasn't sure if he could outrun her, but he had no choice. "Stay." "Away!" Jake shouted, his voice louder this time, more urgent. The girl didn't seem to care. She kept advancing, her movements fluid, as if she had done this 100 times before. Jake backed up into a corner of the room. His eyes darted around, searching for anything that could help him. There were no weapons, no doors, no windows. Just the girl and the knife. Da-da-da. His mind raced, trying to figure out what he could do to escape, but every plan he thought of seemed impossible. He was trapped. As the girl took another step closer, Jake's fear turned into anger. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, hoping to get some sort of response. But she didn't speak. She simply kept her cold gaze locked on him. The silence between them felt heavy. Jake's breath was shallow as he struggled to think. He had to get out of this or he wouldn't make it out alive. Then, a thought crossed his mind. He had to defend himself. He couldn't just wait for her to strike again. With a deep breath, Jake glanced around the room once more, his eyes landing on the small metal chair in the corner. He rushed toward it, hoping it was sturdy enough to block the girl's attack. He grabbed the chair, holding it out in front of him like a shield. The girl stopped moving for a moment, as if evaluating the situation. For a second, Jake thought he might have a chance. But then she lunged again, faster than before. Jake raised the chair just in time to block the knife. Force of her attack pushed him backward, but the chair held. He gritted his teeth, holding the chair in front of him as if it was the only thing keeping him alive. But the girl wasn't done. She swung the knife at him again, aiming for his side. Jake twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the strike. His heart raced. He had never been in a fight like this before, and the panic was starting to take over. He couldn't let that happen. He had to stay focused. With a desperate movement, Jake swung the chair at her, knocking her back. The girl stumbled, but only for a moment. Her eyes flashed with something that resembled annoyance, and for the first time, Jake saw a hint of emotion. She wasn't just a killer, she was someone with a purpose. But what was that purpose? Why was she after him? Before he could answer his own questions, the girl attacked again, more determined than ever. Jake barely had time to react. His mind screamed at him to run, to do something, anything, but the fear was clouding his thoughts. He had to survive. As the girl's knife came at him again, Jake did the only thing he could think of. He pushed the chair forward with all his strength, forcing her back. It was enough to give him a few seconds to think, to plan his next move. But he didn't have much time. Suddenly, everything went black. When Jake finally came to, his head was spinning. It felt as though the world had turned upside down. The sharp pain in his chest had faded, but his body still felt weak. Slowly, he opened his eyes and tried to sit up, only to realize he was no longer in the same place. The strange room he had been in earlier was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar, dimly lit hallway. The air was colder now, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Jake's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened. Had he passed out? Was the girl still here? He didn't know where he was, and he couldn't remember how he got here. He glanced down at his hands, expecting to see blood or bruises, but there was nothing. Not a single mark. It was as if the fight had never happened. His heart raced again, and he stood up cautiously, every muscle in his body aching. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with doors that seemed to lead nowhere. There was no way out. Panic threatened to rise in him again, but he forced it down. He needed to stay calm. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming. Without thinking, Jake quickly ducked behind a door, trying to hide in the shadows. He pressed his back against the cold metal wall, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice him. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts. He could hear his heart thumping in his chest. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Jake held his breath, hoping the person wouldn't come inside. But then, to his horror, the door swung open. It was the girl. She stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the dark hallway, her expression cold and focused. The knife was still in her hand. Jake's first instinct was to run, but his body wouldn't move. He was paralyzed with fear. The girl stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the shadows. For a moment it seemed as if she was going to pass right by him, but then she stopped. Her gaze shifted slightly, as though she could feel something was off. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had to do something, anything. He pushed himself off the wall and grabbed a metal pipe that was lying on the floor nearby. He had no idea what he planned to do with it, but it was better than nothing. As he swung the pipe at her, the girl reacted in an instant. She ducked and spun out of the way with incredible speed. Her movements were so fluid and precise that Jake barely had time to process what had just happened. She was on him in a flash, her knife raised high. In a panic, Jake swung the pipe again, this time aiming for her side. The girl blocked the strike with ease, her expression unchanged. She was faster, stronger, and seemed to know exactly how to handle every attack he threw at her. Jake stumbled backward, trying to keep his distance. He could feel his breath quickening. He was out of his depth here. This girl wasn't just trying to kill him, she was hunting him, with a sudden burst of speed. The girl lunged at him, her knife aiming straight for his throat. Jake barely managed to dodge, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the knife slice through the air, just inches from his skin. "Why are you doing this?" Jake shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Why me?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she pushed forward again, her knife aimed for his chest. Jake barely had time to react as he stumbled back, trying to keep the pipe between them. His mind was racing. He needed to think, to find a way out of this. But the more he struggled, the more it felt like he was sinking into a trap. Jake glanced around desperately for an escape. The hallway was endless, the doors all locked, and the girl was closing in on him. There was nowhere to run, but then something unexpected happened. The girl hesitated. For just a moment, her eyes softened, and her grip on the knife loosened. It was as if a thought had crossed her mind, something that made her question what she was doing. Jake saw the hesitation and seized the opportunity. He didn't know how much time he had, but it was enough to strike. He swung the pipe at her again, this time hitting her arm. The knife fell from her hand, clattering to the floor. Jake, panting and scared, didn't stop to think. He grabbed her wrist, pinning her to the ground. The girl didn't resist. She lay there, looking up at him, her expression still unreadable. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Jake was breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat. His heart was still racing from the fight, but now there was a strange stillness in the air. "What is this?" "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. He wasn't sure if he wanted an answer or if he just needed to hear her speak. The silence between them was unbearable. The girl blinked slowly, her eyes narrowing. She didn't seem angry or afraid. She was confused. It was hard to tell. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and calm. "I'm here to kill you," she said flatly, "but I don't know why." Jake felt his grip tighten on her wrist. "What do you mean you don't know why? You tried to kill me." The girl's gaze never left his face. "I don't know why I was sent. I don't know why you're important. All I know is I have to kill you." Jake's mind spun. He didn't understand. Why would anyone want him dead? What was so special about him? "Who sent you?" Jake demanded, trying to make sense of the situation. The girl's eyes flickered for just a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice almost like a whisper. "I don't remember." Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway again. This time the sound was much louder, and it wasn't just one person. There were many. Someone else was coming. The girl's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time Jake saw fear in her expression. She quickly pushed him away, grabbing her knife from the floor as she scrambled to her feet. "They'll be here soon," she said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to get out of here now." Jake didn't know whether to trust her, but there was no time to think. He had no choice. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest door, praying that it would lead to some kind of escape. Jake and the girl rushed through the narrow hallway, their footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet space. His heart was still pounding from the close call. The girl, whose name he had yet to learn, pulled ahead, her movements swift and calculated. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, while Jake struggled to keep up. He was still in shock, barely understanding what was happening. "Where are we going?" Jake asked, his voice shaking as he glanced around at the dimly lit hallways. "Why are they after me?" The girl didn't answer immediately. She kept moving forward, her gaze focused ahead. They reached a metal door at the end of the hallway. She glanced over her shoulder at Jake, her eyes softening for just a moment, before pushing the door open with a sharp pull. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low. She quickly stepped into the room, and Jake followed her without question. The room they entered was smaller, more cramped, and it seemed to be filled with old equipment. It didn't look like a typical laboratory or military facility, but there was something cold and sterile about it. Jake's eyes scanned the space, trying to make sense of it, but it was all a blur. What was happening? Why was he here? Why did that girl know? That young woman want to kill him? Once the door shut behind them, the girl finally stopped. She turned to face Jake, her breathing still heavy from the sprint. Her expression was hard to read, but there was something different about her now. She didn't seem as intent on killing him. In fact, she seemed ... conflicted. "Who sent you?" Jake demanded, his voice firmer this time. He needed answers. The girl hesitated for a moment, clearly struggling with her words. "I don't remember," she said quietly. "I don't know." "Who gave me the order? All I know is that I was told to kill you." Jake stared at her, confused. "Then why didn't you?" I don't know," she whispered. "Something doesn't feel right. When I first saw you, I was sure I had to kill you, but now I'm not so sure." Jake took a step forward, his mind racing with questions. "What do you mean? Did you hesitate?" The girl's eyes dropped to the floor. "I don't know how to explain it. When I was trained, I was told that some targets don't matter, that it's just about following orders. But when I was sent to kill you, something changed. You're not like the others." Jake blinked, trying to process her words. "What do you mean I'm not like the others? I don't even know why you're here or why you think I'm important." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and a hint of fear. "I don't know either. But I know you're different. I was trained to never question my mission, to kill without hesitation. But when I came for you, it felt wrong. I've never felt like this before." Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was getting more and more complicated. "So, ... what now?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied softly. "I'm supposed to kill you, but I can't do it anymore." Jake didn't know what to say. He had just been attacked by this girl who was clearly trained to kill, and now she was telling him she couldn't go through with it. The whole situation didn't make sense. Before he could ask more questions, the girl suddenly turned away, her hand resting on her forehead as if she were trying to push away some deep confusion. "I need answers," she said after a long pause, her voice shaky. "I need to know why I was sent, why you were marked for death." Jake nodded. "I don't have any answers, but we can figure it out together. I don't know who you are, but right now, we need to work together." For the first time since Jake had woken up in this strange place, the girl's expression softened. She didn't seem as cold or detached as she had earlier. In fact, there was a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. Maybe you're right," she whispered. "Maybe we can figure this out together." Just as Jake thought things were starting to make sense, the silence was shattered by a loud noise from outside the room. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer, and Jake's heart raced again. It was them. It found them. "They're coming," the girl said quickly, her voice urgent. "You need to hide. They can't find you." Jake barely had time to react before the door slammed open. 2 armed guards, dressed in dark uniforms, stepped into the room. They looked directly at Jake, their expressions cold and emotionless. "There you are," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. "We've been looking for you." Before Jake could move, the girl stepped between him and the guards, holding up her hand to stop them. "Leave him alone," she said firmly, her voice suddenly full of authority. The guards hesitated, clearly surprised by her defiance. They exchanged a glance, as if considering their options. Finally, the second guard spoke. "You know the rules. He's a threat. He's to be eliminated." The girl's hand tightened into a fist. "No, I won't let you." Jake watched in shock as the girl, the one who had been sent to kill him, now stood between him and the armed guards. There was no way she could win this fight. But there was something about her that had changed. She wasn't the same person who had attacked him before. She was different now, stronger, more confident. "What are you going to do?" one of the guards asked, his tone mocking. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward a small door at the back of the room. It opened with a soft hiss, revealing a dark passageway. She didn't look back at the guards. She only had one goal now: to get Jake to safety. "You have to trust me," she said quietly, her voice full of urgency. Jake nodded, unsure of what was happening, but knowing that he didn't have a choice. The girl was his only chance. The guards moved forward, but they were too late. The door slammed shut behind them, and Jake and the girl disappeared into the darkness, leaving everything and everyone behind. Jake followed the girl through the narrow, dark passageway. The air was cold, and the walls seemed to close in around him as they moved deeper into the unknown. The footsteps behind them had faded, but he knew they were not safe yet. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the guards chasing after them. The girl, whose name he still didn't know, was leading the way. Her movements were fast and purposeful, and she seemed to know exactly where she was going. It was as though she had been here before, though Jake had no idea how that could be possible. She was clearly not just a soldier. It was something about her, something more. He needed answers, but the way she acted, her hesitation, her willingness to protect him, left him confused. "Where are we going?" Jake whispered, keeping his voice low as he hurried to keep up with her. The girl didn't answer at first, but she turned to him, her face shadowed by the dim light. Her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination. "To the safe room," she replied, her voice softer than before. "It's the only place they won't find us, at least for now." Jake felt a small sense of relief. He was still terrified, but the girl's confidence gave him a tiny bit of hope. He had no idea who these people were who were chasing him, or why they wanted him dead. But he had to trust her. She was his only chance. They continued walking in silence for a few more minutes. The echo of their footsteps, the only sound in the narrow corridor. The passageway was dark, the walls made of smooth, cold metal. Every corner seemed to lead to another turn, another hallway.
Ow.
Jake could barely keep track of where they were going, but the girl seemed to know exactly where she was headed. She walked with purpose, her head held high, as if she had done this before. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall. The girl quickly punched in a code on a small keypad beside the door, and with a quiet click, it opened. The room inside was much larger than Jake expected. It was clean and empty, with metal walls and a few basic pieces of furniture, nothing extravagant, just what was necessary. The girl stepped inside first, glancing over her shoulder at Jake. "Stay close," she said, her voice more serious now. "We can't afford to be found." Jake nodded, stepping into the room and glancing around. The door behind him shut with a soft hiss, and the room went silent once again. He could still hear the sound of his heart pounding in his chest, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he was able to breathe a little easier. They were safe for now. The girl took a deep breath, her shoulders stiffening as she turned to face Jake. She had been acting strange, and he could tell she was still wrestling with her thoughts. She didn't seem like the same person who had tried to kill him. The girl who had attacked him earlier had been cold, almost robotic in her movements. But now, she was different, vulnerable even. "I owe you an explanation," she said quietly, "but I'm not sure where to begin." Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with curiosity and suspicion. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said, his voice softer than before. "But I don't understand. Why did you try to kill me?" The girl hesitated, her gaze falling to the floor as she crossed her arms. She seemed to be fighting with herself, torn between duty and something else. "I was sent to eliminate you," she said, her voice low. "I didn't know why, didn't question it. I never questioned anything before." Jake frowned. "What's going on?" The girl's eyes flashed with something anger, frustration, maybe regret, but she quickly looked away. "I can't remember who gave the orders, but I've always been trained to follow them. No questions, no hesitation. That's the way I was raised. That's the way it works." She paused, taking a shaky breath. Jake could see the conflict in her eyes now. She wasn't just a killer. She was someone who had been forced into a role. Someone who had never had a choice. "But when I saw you, something felt wrong," she continued. "I knew I was supposed to kill you. I knew I had to, but I couldn't do it. I don't even know why." She shook her head, as if trying to shake the confusion out of her mind. "I've been told that you're dangerous, that you pose a threat to everything. But the truth is, I don't understand why. I don't know who you really are." Jake's mind raced as he listened to her. He was trying to make sense of everything. Why had he been targeted? What was so special about him that it warranted this kind of attention? Why did she hesitate when it came to killing him? "Do you know who I am?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He had to know.
Out there.
Had to be a reason why they were after him. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. "I don't know who you are," she said softly. "I think I'm starting to understand something. I think you're more than just a target. More important than I was ever told." Jake shook his head, trying to piece the puzzle together. "How can I be important? I'm just a guy who woke up in a strange place and had someone try to kill him." The girl met his gaze. "You don't know it yet, but you're the key to something bigger. The reason I was sent to kill you isn't just because of who you are, it's because of what you are." Jake's confusion deepened. "What do you mean? What am I?" She hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the last hope for peace, or the beginning of the end." The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Jake had no idea what she meant. But something in her voice told him that what she was saying was the truth. "I don't understand," Jake said, his voice filled with disbelief. The girl took a step closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't either." But we need to find out. Together. Jake stood silently in the middle of the small room, processing the girl's words. She had just told him he was the key to something greater, something that could either bring peace or destroy everything. But how could that be true? He was just an ordinary man who had woken up in a strange place with no idea how he got there. The girl, still standing near the door, watched him closely. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty and a hint of guilt, but there was also a sense of urgency. It was clear she was struggling with what to do next, just as much as Jake was. "Do you think they'll stop coming after me?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I'm this important, why am I still here? Why haven't they killed me already?" The girl didn't immediately answer. Instead, she walked toward him slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Because they want you alive," she said softly. "They need you for something. They want to control you, or they want to use you as a weapon." Jake felt a chill run through him at the thought. The girl's words made sense, but they didn't help ease the fear building in his chest. "What exactly do they want from me?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. The girl's eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, her face clouded with thought. When she finally looked back up, her expression was serious. "You're more than just a person to them. You're part of a larger plan. I don't know all the details, but I know enough to understand that if they get what they want, everything will change." Jake's mind raced. "What do you mean, everything will change?" She took a deep breath, stepping closer. "They have been searching for someone like you for a long time. Your blood, your DNA, it holds the key to something. They've been trying to unlock. If they control you, they'll be able to create weapons that can destroy entire planets, entire civilizations. It's all about power. You think you're the answer to everything they've been trying to build." Jake's eyes widened in shock. "But why me? Why not someone else?" The girl shook her head, a look of frustration on her face. I don't know why they chose you. I don't know why your DNA is so special. I do know that you're the only one who can stop them." Jake stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of her words sank in. "Stop them? How?" She stepped back, her hands running through her hair in a motion that seemed almost helpless. "I don't know yet, but we have to figure it out. I've been sent to kill you, but I can't do it. Not anymore. I can't let them use you, but I also know we're running out of time." Jake felt the uncertainty flood back into his chest. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't someone who had been trained to fight. He was just a man who had somehow ended up in the middle of a war he didn't understand. And now, the girl who had once tried to kill him was telling him that his life held the key to stopping an empire from conquering the galaxy. "I don't know what to do." "Shh," Jake whispered, his voice filled with desperation. "I don't know how to stop them." The girl's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. "You don't have to do it alone," she said. "I'm here to help. Together we can find a way." Jake didn't know what to say. He had been thrown into a world of danger and betrayal, where nothing was what it seemed. The girl Lyra, he now realized, had been trained to kill him, but now she was offering her help. It didn't make sense, but at the same time, it did. He had no other choice. If what she said was true, and his life was the key to stopping this terrible power, then he couldn't just hide away. He had to do something. But the question was, what? How could he stop them? He didn't even know who they were. The galaxy was too big, too complicated for him to understand. And yet here he was, standing in the middle of it all. "What's the next step?" Jake asked quietly, his mind made up. He couldn't sit around waiting to be hunted anymore. Had to take control. Lyra's face darkened, and she looked toward the door as if she could hear something from beyond it. "We need to get to the central hub. It's where they keep all the data. If we can get access, we might be able to learn more about what they want. We need to find out why they've been after you and what they're planning." Jake nodded, his determination growing. "How do we get there?" Lyra glanced around the room, her eyes scanning every corner. "There's a hidden passage nearby. We'll take it to the main control center. It's risky, but it's the fastest way." Jake took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Let's do it. We don't have much time." Without another word, Lyra led the way to a small panel hidden under a section of the wall. She slid her hand over it, and the panel slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside was a narrow corridor, dark and tight, but it looked like it would lead them to their destination. Jake followed her into the passageway, the door closing behind them with a soft thud. He could feel the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on him. The further they went, the less he understood. But Lyra was right. They had to keep moving. There was no turning back now. As they made their way through the dark passage, Jake couldn't help but think about his life before all of this. He'd been just an ordinary person, living an ordinary life. But now he was caught up in something far bigger than he ever imagined, and it wasn't just his life that was at risk. It was the future of the entire galaxy. Lyra paused ahead, signaling for Jake to stop. She peeked around the corner, her eyes scanning the area. "We're close," she whispered. "Stay low." Jake nodded and crouched down, following her every movement. He had no idea what they would face next, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't afford to fail. Jake and Lyra moved through the dark corridor, each step they took echoing softly in the quiet passage. The air was cold and stale, and the narrow walls seemed to close in around them. Jake could feel the weight of their mission pressing on him. With every step, they were close to finding the truth, close to uncovering the reason why his life had been turned upside down. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that danger was lurking just beyond the next corner. Lyra, moving with purpose, glanced over her shoulder at him. "We're almost there," she whispered, her voice low and steady. Despite everything, she seemed calm. She had been in situations like this before, Jake realized. He, on the other hand, had no idea what to expect next. They reached another door at the end of the passageway. It was made of thick metal, with a keypad beside it. Lyra stepped forward, her fingers quickly tapping in a code. Jake stood back, watching as she worked with quick, precise movements. There was no hesitation in her actions. She was prepared, like someone who had done this 100 times before. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a dimly lit control room. It was filled with large monitors and strange machines, all humming softly in the background. The room had the look of something high-tech, a place where important decisions were made, a place where the fate of entire worlds could be decided in an instant. Lyra motioned for Jake to follow her as she stepped inside. The door closed silently behind them, cutting off their escape. Jake felt a surge of fear. They had made it this far, but now they were in the heart of their enemy's territory. There was no turning back. Lyra moved quickly to one of the control panels, her fingers flying over the buttons and switches. "I've been here before," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But this is different now. They've made changes." Jake watched her, his mind racing. What kind of changes? Lyra didn't answer right away. She was focused on the screen in front of her, her eyes scanning the data as it flashed across. The monitor, Jake couldn't make sense of any of it. The numbers and codes were all foreign to him, but he knew that whatever Lyra was doing, it was important. She turned to him, her face tense. "They've been keeping track of you, everything you've done, everywhere you've been. ... It's all here. This facility has been monitoring you for months." Jake's heart sank. "What do you mean? How could they?" Lyra held up a hand, silencing him. "It's worse than we thought," she said, her voice low. "You're not just a target. You're part of a bigger plan. They've been trying to control you for a long time. They knew you'd be here eventually." Jake felt a chill run through him. How could they know that? "I don't know," Lyra admitted, her voice tense. "But they've been planning this for a while. They've been studying your every move." Jake stepped closer, his mind reeling. He had no idea what Lyra meant, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. They weren't just after him for some random reason. He was a part of something bigger, something he couldn't understand. And it was dangerous. He glanced around the room, noticing the strange equipment surrounding them. "What now? How do we stop them?" Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and she looked at him with a mix of determination and concern. "We need to find out more about this plan. Or there's a way to stop them, but we need to get to the heart of their operation. We need to uncover what they're planning, and we need to do it fast." Before Jake could respond, a loud alarm sounded in the distance. It was a deep warning tone that made his stomach drop. The lights in the room flickered, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move, now." Jake's heart raced as he looked at her, his mind scrambling for a plan. There was no time to think. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but he couldn't stand here waiting. To be caught, he had to act. Without saying another word, Lyra grabbed his arm and pulled him toward another door at the far end of the room. They had no choice but to escape, but the path ahead was uncertain. The facility was vast, and the enemy was closing in on them. But Jake felt something he hadn't felt before: hope. Lyra was on his side now, and together they had a chance. As they stepped through the door, they were greeted by a long, dark hallway. The only sound was the rush of their footsteps. As they moved quickly down the narrow path, Jake kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the guards chasing them. But there was no sign of anyone yet. "Where are we going?" Jake asked, his breath coming in quick gasps. Lyra didn't answer right away. She was focused on the path ahead, her eyes scanning every corner. "There's a way out," she said. "We're going to find it." They rounded a corner, and Jake saw a large door at the end of the hallway. It was their only hope. If they could make it through, they might just escape. But as they moved closer, the door opened with a loud screech. A group of armed guards appeared from the shadows, blocking their path. Jake froze, his body instinctively tensing as they drew closer. "Don't move," one of the guards barked. "You're not going anywhere." Lyra's grip on Jake tightened. She looked at him, her expression hardening. "We have no choice," she whispered. "Fight." Before Jake could react, Lyra sprang into action, moving with a speed that took him by surprise. She disarmed one of the guards in a flash, her movements quick and precise. Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then his instincts kicked in. He rushed forward, grabbing one of the fallen weapons from the ground and turning it on the remaining guards. The guards hesitated for a moment, surprised by the sudden resistance. But Lyra and Jake didn't wait for them to recover. They pushed forward, their adrenaline pumping as they fought their way through the enemy lines. Together, they made it to the door, and as Lyra slammed it open, they found themselves outside, in the open air. The bright sunlight burned Jake's eyes for a moment, but he didn't stop. They had made it out, but they weren't safe yet. "This isn't over," Lyra said, her voice filled with determination. "But this is a new beginning. We're not running anymore. We're taking the fight to them." Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with a newfound sense of hope. Together, they were unstoppable.